On this week's edition of the Palace of Pistons podcast, who will be the next Detroit Piston to appear in the Olympics? JB Bickerstaff hinted that he's going to use Cade Cunningham a little bit differently than he's been used before. We're going to talk about what we think that might look like. And finally, which Pistons will be on the outside looking in of a rotation spot come opening night. All that and more on this week's edition of the Palace of Pistons podcast. Let's get it.
Good evening, everybody, and welcome to another exciting night of NBA basketball.
The Pistons are digging in. They got the depth. They got the big men. They got the better basketball team. No doubt about it.
Pistons need a three, and they have just under 3 seconds to do it. Here's Chauncey Billups. Here it is. He's got it. He's got it. Chauncey Billups hits the three. Overtime. Amazing.
Out of bounds. Detroit basketball.
And we're back for another edition of the Palace of Pistons podcast, brought to you by I Believe. It's myself, Aaron Johnson, and Jasper Apollonia with you for this week's show. Some sources are saying Mike Anglano's still going to be a part of the Palace of Pistons podcast later this week. Might have an extra edition of the POP podcast coming your way. Stay tuned in your podcast feed or in our YouTube feed for that later. Jasper, some great stuff to get into this week, chugging along in the offseason. We are honestly not that far away from Pistons basketball being relevant again, about another month or so, but quickly here before we get into it, how you doing, my friend? It's good to see you.
Oh, gangster, how you doing today, man? It's a pleasure to be on here. I love that you got your Chris Broussard sauces cooking in regards to Mike for later on this week. Yeah, I swear I missed last week's podcast, but the one before that I said it always happens. We get to the end of July, beginning of August, we go, oh my God, we have so long until we get to talk about like relevant Piston stuff. And then we get into August, we're like, it's right around the corner.
Yeah, we'll have it happens by the end of August. You get to September and you get to training camp and you get to media day, and all of a sudden it's the first week of October and preseason's kicking off. It'll be here before you know it. But don't worry, folks. We've still got 3 good topics to talk about on today's show.
And thank God we just watched the U.S. Olympic team because they got us a little more fired up, I think, for this podcast than we would have been otherwise, right?
No doubt. That was an interesting game. And luckily, Team USA pulled it out. But Serbia, wow, the first 3 quarters from them were spectacular. We are going to talk about the Olympics, but we're going to do that on the flip side of talking about our sponsor, BetOnline. BetOnline is the world's most trusted betting platform and your number one source for everything online sports betting. Right now, you can receive a 50% free bet of up to $250 on your first deposit to bet on anything from the Olympics to baseball to Formula One racing. BetOnline has every stat, every matchup, and even live odds and spreads while the games are being played. When the game is over, head on over to our online casino and get in on a game of blackjack or poker or unwind with one of our over 150 slots games. Head to the website today to get in on the action. Use promo code BLEAV, BLEAV, for your 50% free bet credit on your first deposit of up to $250. Bet online. The game starts here. All right, let's talk about the Olympics. And I'd be remiss if I didn't mention before we did that to go to palaceofpistons.com, our Substack, and subscribe completely for free. It takes 30 seconds to just type in your email. You'll get all of our podcast episodes and any written content which we have coming out multiple times a week delivered directly to your email inbox. You won't have to find our articles on Twitter or remember to go to the website for any other reason. You'll get it all directly sent to you free of charge. Link in the description wherever you are watching or listening from. But let's talk about the Olympics now. We're not necessarily focusing on Team USA's miraculous comeback against the Nikola Jokic-led Serbia team that took them to the brink, that took them to the final buzzer in a spectacular game and a spectacular finish. We're talking about the Pistons in the Olympics. No Pistons in the Olympics this year. The closest connection that the Pistons could have had is if Killian Hayes would have made France's Olympic team, but Killian did not make it post training camp, tryout, whatever you want to call it, was not selected to the French national team. But this brings an interesting question to mind. Who will be the next Piston to appear in the Olympics? I think probably only a couple countries you could look at. Jasper, you're thinking far down the line when we talked pre-show. Start us off with who you think will be the next Piston to make the Olympics.
Yeah, I mean, look, when you're going up against luminaries such as Nando De Colo, it's always going to be hard to make an Olympic team if you're Killian Hayes. But yeah, I mean, I think, look, we're not going to focus on the game itself, but I think first off, it's worth noting who the guys who carried Team USA to that comeback victory were. Primarily, LeBron James, Stephen Curry, and Kevin Durant. Those were the guys that really closed out the game. I guess you could argue Joel Embiid as well, but whatever. I'm not screw that guy. So I think it's worth noting that like all three of those guys, there's a very good chance none of them are on next on the 2028 squad. I would say it's a lock for LeBron, but then again, I'm reminded of LeBron is 30. There's can't be many more years left of this fuckery tweet in regards to him. You can't count him out. I think it's going to be very, very interesting to see. And I do think there are a few guys for the Pistons that have a really good shot at doing it. Number one is, it's not the sexiest one, but it's Simone Fontecchio. Right? Like he's got to be the biggest lock out of anybody on the Pistons if Italy were to make it to the Olympics in 2028. I just have no idea how a 31-year-old Simone Fontecchio would not be on that squad. He'd probably be one of the very biggest leaders there. So I think he's the most obvious candidate. But out of the Americans, it's hard to say. I do think, though, in 2028, the number one guy with a shot at making that Olympic team is going to be Jalen Duren. And the reason I say that is because there are so many good young guards for the U.S. I mean, think about even the guys that were nowhere even close to making this team, and like Trae Young, and or even like a De'Aaron Fox or something like that. And while Cade Cunningham certainly has the talent to be in that discussion, I just think that there are a lot of other guys that in a given year could beat him out for that spot. I think with Jalen Duren, look, if he's able to put together a stronger defensive resume and grow over the next 4 years, you're going to be talking about a 25-year-old going into his prime, who's an absolutely hellacious rebounder, can do a little bit of everything offensively other than shoot. And when you look at what Team USA has ahead of them in terms of rebuilding after you lose these stars that carried you there, I think they're going to have to take a look at younger guys and really building that program back up to where in 2032 they're going to have a chance to be again at the pinnacle there. So I think for me, it's got to be Jalen Duren. Like I don't see Anthony Davis being on the next squad. With Joel Embiid, who knows when it comes to health. I think really as of right now, like Bam Adebayo is the only lock I see from those big men moving forward. So I think, and maybe this sounds a little crazy considering I've said like I'm so back and forth on Duren's future. I think Jalen Duren's got to be the guy for me.
Interesting. I look at the big situation for Team USA. I think about some of the other young bigs in the league. I know someone like Chet Holmgren make it over him down the line. Walker Kessler's been a member of the Team USA select team, and there have been some others as well. But Jalen Duren, definitely someone of interest for Team USA. He was with the select team for the second time this year. And I can see it. I also see Simone Fontecchio. I think I will go Cade Cunningham. I know there's a lot of talent. I know there are a lot of very good guards in the NBA. But if Cade Cunningham is as good as we think he is and is going to continue to be develop into the player that we feel he can be, I know before I've said I think Cade could be a top 10 player in the NBA if everything swung right. Then I think he has a very legitimate shot to be a part of a Team USA roster down the line. And in 2028, when he's what, 26-ish, 27-ish, that feels like it could be a sweet spot for him to where he's at the near prime of his career, where he could very well be that top 10, top 15, top 20 player in the league and be a part of that roster. So I think I will take the pick of picking the best player on the team, but someone like Simone Fontecchio representing Italy makes a ton of sense. I like that pick for you, especially considering the shirt you have on as we record this podcast. But I would be remiss if I didn't go Cade Cunningham. I don't think it's fair to him to not include him in that conversation. Jasper, before we recorded, you also mentioned Asar Thompson. Talk about him for a minute, because I think that's interesting.
Yeah, I don't see him as like a 2028 guy. I just think that based on like where the US is, it's going to be just hard for him. He's got a lot of development ahead of him, but I think 2032, he's a very sneaky pick to be a guy who's really in that conversation. It's obviously all going to come down to the jumper. Like if he can't shoot, I just don't see how he can make an Olympic team. But if he can just be a average, slightly above average shooter, I think when you look in 8 years at a 28-year-old Asar Thompson, there's a very, very good chance that he is one of the top 5 defensive wings in the league. If he's able to put together his passing skill set, if he's able to develop a jumper, he's still going to be an incredible athlete at that point in his career. He just looks to me like, you remember Tayshaun Prince being an Olympian, and a big reason for that was just because of what he brought defensively. Obviously, Tayshaun did not play many minutes, but there was a reason he was on that team. If you're a long, athletic, great defender, there's going to be a space for you in any basketball team. And I think Asar Thompson is definitely a player that I would be keeping an eye on and thinking about in a few years.
So I think you could be onto something there, to be honest. Is he going to be a top 12, 15 American player in 4 or 8 years? No, he won't be. But if you look at how things have gone for Team USA, now I know they scraped away the win against Serbia. We'll see what happens in the finals. But I think we're getting to that point where, yes, it's great to have the most top-end talent. And I think we are starting to see this with someone like Derek White making the team this year, or being brought onto the team this year. Team USA might have to start thinking about building more of a functional team rather than just trying to get the top 12 to 15 players, American-born players, to be a part of Team USA. And that's where I see there being a case for Asar Thompson down the line, because he has all the makings of being one of the very best defensive wings in the league that can guard 1 through 4. But he's probably not going to be overall that high-level player of the wings on Team USA's roster. You're Jason Tatum, you're LeBron James. He's just not going to be anywhere near that. But if Team USA starts to build more of a team and maybe sacrifices a little bit on the talent level, someone like Asar Thompson could, as long as his development continues to head in the right trajectory, make a ton of sense for some of the skills that we see in him now. His ability to rebound, his ability to defend. Like, there's a lot to like there. So if Team USA focuses more on building a team, I think that makes a ton of sense.
Yeah, I mean, and I think you're exactly onto something when you talk about the team building aspect of it, because if this Olympic cycle has taught us anything, it's that Team USA, I mean, it's been happening for a while now, but I think you're really starting to see where 2028 could be a big pitfall for Team USA. Like, I don't think when you look at the future for this squad, I don't think they're a lock for gold by any means in 2028. I mean, just look at the Serbia game. Look, the best player in the world is not an American. And I think that is something that is very, very telling. You can't just go out there and be like, well, we have by far the best player. We have the best players, even plural, in every single game. We have, such an overwhelming talent advantage. Doesn't really matter how we build the team. We're just going to overrun them. Shoot, this team almost lost to South Sudan, man. Like they almost lost to South Sudan. And if Serbia hadn't gone cold in the fourth quarter, they would have lost that game too. Like Nikola Jokic hits a couple threes. We're talking about a bronze medal U.S. team. So I think it's very important for the U.S. to start readjusting the way that they build this squad. And yeah, I think Asar Thompson is definitely the kind of guy that you want out there if you're trying to build a complete team that can compete in all facets of the game, that can compete in all situations, because these games are just going to get tighter and tighter and tighter. And let's be honest, man, in 4 years, the U.S. might not have the best player in the world. They might not even have the second best player in the world. Because
do they have the best player in the world right now?
No, Nikola Jokic.
Best?
Nikola Jokic. And frankly, I think there's a good chance that, Victor Wembanyama is another guy in that discussion. Nick, like you can even talk about somebody like Luka Doncic. Like there's a lot to go. SGA might win an MVP in the next few years. He plays for Canada. So like there's a good chance that you are going to go into multiple games in 2028 without the best player on the court, which seems almost inconceivable if you're the United States, considering how they've just dominated the last 30 years. But I think it is a very, very strong possibility that the U.S. has to readjust the way that they build their team, the things that they focus on. So that's where, for me, like I actually think, Asar, Jalen Duren, Cade, I think that they have a better chance at making a 2028, 2032 team than they would have if this was a decade ago, even if they are in their primes. Like I just think that the way the U.S. is going to have to go about their business is going to have to change. So yeah, I definitely think that there is a bigger opening for Pistons players in the future than there would have been in the past, because the U.S. is going to have to adjust, and they're going to have to rebuild, and they're going to have to figure out, I think, a different strategy moving into the future.
No doubt. I think that's something interesting to think about. I'm glad you brought that up as something to talk about on this show, because I'm very curious what everyone else thinks. I think we listed off 4 names. Maybe you guys feel there's someone else out there. Let us know in the comments below, or tweet us at Palace of Pistons. Tell us who you think is going to be the next Piston that plays in the Olympics. Let's move on now to our second topic, and we're moving over to JB Bickerstaff, who was on the Road Trippin' podcast with Richard Jefferson. One of the players he, of course, talked about was indeed Cade Cunningham. And I think he made a really interesting comment that sparked my mind on something we should talk about. And he talked about how Cade Cunningham can play multiple positions, can play 1 through 3. And that has me thinking, Cade Cunningham has been used as a pure point guard for all of his time in the NBA right now through 2 different head coaches. How might JB Bickerstaff differ in using Cade Cunningham than he's been used in years past? I think that's an interesting discussion, and it really intrigues me on how Cunningham could look under Bickerstaff. And it also goes along with my thoughts on starting Jaden Ivey with Cade Cunningham, because I think you can do some interesting stuff there. But Jasper, I'll let you go first. How might JB Bickerstaff use Cade Cunningham differently than he's been used in the first 3 seasons of his career?
I mean, first off, I know we're still in the honeymoon period, and I'm sure this will change, but my God, how refreshing is it to hear JB Bickerstaff talk? Just on the podcast with Richard Jefferson, they're joking around within 30 seconds. And I know that they're friends, but like Monty Williams just came across as so impersonal and cold at times. And you just get a total 180 on that vibe from JB Bickerstaff, at least in my mind. And exactly like you said, him bringing up Cade potentially playing 1 through 3, that feels like something that just would have never crossed the mind of Monty Williams last year. And obviously staggering when it comes to Jaden Ivey and Cade Cunningham. We know all about that. So I think it's very interesting. I don't know, Aaron. I really come down in two schools of thought here. Because one, I'm still not entirely sold on Jaden Ivey running the offense and taking the ball out of Cade Cunningham's hands. I also think that the Pistons still do have a backup point guard issue. Like, I think they need another ball handler still. And don't forget, they still have an open roster spot. So I think that Cade still at this point needs to take a large role. I guess for me, I'm wondering from your perspective, like, do you think when he's talking about this, do you think he's talking about it offensively, defensively, or both sides of the court? Because I think if Cade is going to play 1 through 3 defensively, there has to be a step up in his ability there and in his effort level there. And I think a big part of that would come down to how much of the offensive load he's being asked to carry. So do you think that it's a both sides of the court thing? Because as we've noted on this podcast, JB Bickerstaff, his teams play good defense. And I think that that's certainly going to be an expectation, far more than it was last year, don't you?
I do. And so here's the thing with Cunningham. I am interested in the Pistons using him a bit more off the ball. Like, he's still a point guard and he's still this team's point guard. But we saw it and we yearned for it last year. Like, if you give Cade some opportunities off the ball, like, he can do some different things and he can help you in some different ways. I think back to, there was a game against the New York Knicks where Cade was off the ball a lot. It was a really prudent focus for the Pistons for a little bit in that game. And the Cade had a really good performance, was shooting the ball well, got to the corner a little bit, made some shots from there. And I'm interested in using him in different ways. And it sounds like that's what JB Bickerstaff wants to do. My concern with this is I look at the current roster right now, and outside of Jaden Ivey, what other ball handling guards do you have out there that you can put on the floor alongside Cade Cunningham to where he's not handling the ball every possession, where he's maybe spotting up or posting up or doing something else? Like, you don't really have it unless you feel you can play Sasser and Ivey and Cunningham together, or Sasser and Cunningham and Tim Hardaway Jr. I don't know if they have enough ball handling on this roster. I guess that kind of goes back to something we've talked about for the last month or so on the podcast, but this team still probably needs to go get another backup point guard, a veteran point guard that could help with some of that stuff. So someone like a Kyle Lowry or Reggie Jackson would have made a lot of sense there. So I'm interested in using Cade Cunningham a little bit differently on offense. Like, if there's a stretch each game where, he comes in that second quarter or whatever, and for those final 6 minutes of the second quarter, he's playing in an off-ball role, like, maybe there's some new stuff you can do there. Cade has some different skills to where he doesn't have to be on the ball every single possession initiating the offense, but the Pistons have to have someone that can do that as well. And if it's not going to be Cade Cunningham and it's not going to be Jaden Ivey, who's going to do it on this current team? That's what I don't know. I'm interested in using Cunningham differently. I don't know if the Pistons have the personnel to do that a whole time.
Yeah, I mean, I'd love to see him get more catch and shoot opportunities. He shot 37% on catch and shoot threes last year. He took like 3 per game. If you could get that up to like 5 per game, I think that would be absolutely a boon for him, because we know what he can do in terms of his driving ability, what he can do as an individual offensive creator. Him being just able to play a little bit more off ball. And this is something that we discussed when they drafted him originally, was his versatility, his ability to play off ball. I think it really does come down to who are the other ball handlers, who are the other creators. So much of it is going to come down to like what Jaden Ivey can do as a occasional primary ball handler. This is something that we've wanted to see since he was drafted. We've wanted to see a split in those playmaking responsibilities. He looked like he might be capable of it as a rookie. It really did not work out that way last year. And I think a lot of that comes down to who he was playing with, confidence, coaching, whatever it may be. I think there was a myriad of factors involved in that. I don't want to say regression, but certainly stagnation of his playmaking abilities. So I think, yeah, it would be great if you can get Cade Cunningham some more catch and shoot, some more off ball stuff. He's not ever going to be a blow by offensive player. He's never going to kill you with his first step. He's never going to, speed to the rack. That's Jaden Ivey's game. That's Asar Thompson's game. But if you can figure out a way to put somebody with that speed in a primary ball handler position some of the time, to where when Cade Cunningham is getting the ball, the defense is already moving around. The defense is already shaken a little bit. The defense is already having to readjust. That just plays to his strengths right there, because he's going to be able to create more off of those looks. He's going to be able to shoot the ball, and he's going to have an easier job getting to the rim. So while I think the path to Cade playing 1 through 3 is more challenging than we would like at this point, I certainly think it's there. And I would love it if JB Bickerstaff was able to find a way to get him into that position.
This is when you kick yourself with not being able to develop and make a player out of Killian Hayes. Like, because that's the prototypical guy of who you would need if he could have turned into an NBA player to do this with Cade Cunningham. And it didn't happen. It's probably where you're kicking yourself that you didn't get a chance to draft Reed Shepard, or, you passed on Rob Dillingham. Like, there could have been some options there, but to me, it just keeps coming back to the pathway to doing this. It seems difficult. Would be interested in Detroit doing this. I think they would need to make another roster move to do that. And I think we say this every episode at this point, but Pistons are still very much in play to be a part of a trade, whether it's as a third team in the deal or whatever. They have an open roster spot. They've made it very well known that they are open to doing business, taking on a contract with assets attached. Like, is there a veteran guard out there that's maybe on a bit of a bloated contract that the Pistons could acquire with a pick attached to, and that guy can give them some decent minutes? Like, God, I hate to say it, but maybe even have been being able to get someone like Patrick Beverley, who they offered a 1-year deal to earlier this offseason. Like, that would have allowed them to do this a little more, because Beverley gives you that help defensively, can, initiate a little bit of the offense. I just think it's hard with the roster they have right now. But I like that JB Bickerstaff is thinking this way, and it shows he's thinking, a bit intuitively. And that means he's not just thinking that way for Cade Cunningham. He's thinking about that for the entire roster. He's trying to find different ways to maximize this entire roster. And everything we heard from Monty Williams last year was bland, meh. Didn't really seem too interested in his job, his day-to-day. Whether it was the comments about the, how he doesn't like analytics, doesn't want to use analytics, or whether it was just how he coached the team and the rotations that use these 5-man units at all times. Starters play together, bench plays together. That's it. I think JB Bickerstaff, just from what we're hearing, and again, you kind of mentioned it, it's like this honeymoon phase where you feel like everything's going to go great and everything seems perfect and this guy seems great. But right now, he's winning. He's winning right now in the preseason and in the offseason by just like saying the right things and giving those that have watched this team a sense of like, hey, this guy actually knows what he's doing and maybe cares about making this team better. So I like where Bickerstaff's head's at, despite thinking there will be some challenges in making what he might be saying possible. Anything else here, Jasper, before we move on?
Yeah, I will say there's one other player that isn't a point guard, but if he takes a leap in terms of his playmaking ability this offseason, you could definitely open up some more doors for Cade playing a little bit off ball, even if Jaden Ivey isn't that super duper productive primary playmaker. Asar Thompson. And if Asar, along with Jalen Duren and Jaden Ivey, can take a leap in his ability to make plays, because we've seen it, there is a definite passing talent with Asar Thompson. There's something there. It's not fully developed, and obviously the lack of a jumper is still hurting him a little bit. The rawness, his youth, of course, but if he can take a little bit of a leap in that direction, I think that opens up a lot for you as well, to where you don't even necessarily have to have a fully ball dominant guard on the floor at all times. You could kind of split those playmaking duties between Asar and Ivy and Cade Cunningham. So I think that that's another little wrinkle that could certainly play into what the Pistons are able to do with Cade offensively. I think that could definitely be a boon to Detroit, and it's something that I really would like JB Bickerstaff to explore with Asar Thompson's game.
I wonder if there's a world where, not to this full extent, because I don't think Jalen Duren's there, at least not yet in being able to do this, but could Bickerstaff use Duren as a bit more of an offensive hub, kind of like Andre Drummond was used back in like the 2017-18 season, where he had the ball at the high post a lot and was doing a lot of directing and threading the needle on some unique passes. Like, Duren does have some passing chops. I don't think he's like Drummond completely in that sense, but there's a little bit of skill and finesse to his offensive game in that regard. I don't think he's there yet, but I wonder if Bickerstaff will try to explore that. I think, it's at least worth a shot, because it could give you an opportunity to get Cade off the ball, try to use him in a different way, and in turn help develop Duren and round out his offensive skill set.
DHO Drummond, like mentioned, streets don't forget, Aaron. My God.
Yeah.
I had such high hopes. Oh no, they were running so much of that DHO action with Andre Drummond. And yeah, I mean, like, since they drafted him, I've said I see a lot of Bam Adebayo in Jalen Duren's game. Obviously, he still has a lot of work defensively, still is way behind Bam as a passer, but the skill set is there. Yeah, I think that's a totally reasonable thing to do. And again, like we mentioned, with Cade having that lack of top end speed and quickness, top of the key dribble handoff actions are a great way to get a non-super explosive guard a little bit of space at the top of the key going towards the basket. You want to make some easier looks for Cade Cunningham, for anyone, really. That's what I would do. I mean, I was definitely asking for it last year, and it didn't really happen with him. You just had, Duren kind of doing whatever passes he could do in the moment. But yes, I'm certainly with you on that. Do I necessarily want him having like an Andre Drummond, level usage? No, but I think throwing in a few more DHO actions every single game, it can only be to the boon of the team. Like, the more screens you run, the more actions you're able to throw at an opposing team, the more versatility you have on the floor, it only can help you. It only can help you. It will never hurt you. It's only a good thing.
Yeah, I think it'll be interesting to see. I'd like to see a Pistons team that runs a little bit more of a varied offense than just give it to one guy, have him dribble up top for 18 to 20 seconds, and then get whatever shot up you think you can get up. All right,
Cade isn't Luka. Let's not make him Luka. You know what I mean?
Let's move on to our final topic here, talking about the Detroit Pistons rotation. And I've written about it on palaceofpistons.com for the last 2 weeks. I first came out with what my opening night starting lineup would look like if I were in charge of the Detroit Pistons. And then on Wednesday of this week, I came out with a piece talking about what my bench rotation would look like, the 5 guys off the bench that I would play on opening night if I were running the Pistons. Let's talk about who we feel is going to be out of the rotation for Detroit. If you've read my 2 articles, you probably know where I'm at, the guys that I think will be out. I'll talk about those. I'll explain them. I certainly don't think that the Pistons have to use the same 10 guys, 8, 9, 10 guys every single night. I think there will be opportunities for guys that maybe aren't in the rotation always to get in, and for the Pistons to do some mixing and matching. I'm always of the opinion you can use different starting lineups as well based on matchups. So that being said, like, some of these guys probably won't be in the rotation unless there's an injury or something like that. But Jasper, I'll start with you. Who are some of the guys you have on the outside looking in for regular rotation minutes at the start of the year?
This is one of those things that, and I'm glad you said at the start of the year, is going to change throughout the season. There's just no question about it. The Pistons are going to make a trade at some point this season. As we've mentioned, they still have an open roster spot. There are a lot of things in flux here. They still can make a trade. So this this is definitely something that can change very quickly or throughout the season. That being said, I did read your piece on who you would have as your bench guys to start the year, and I think for me the most eligible guy there is actually one of the guys you had in that rotation. I think it's Ron Holland. I just have a hard time seeing him and Asar and Isaiah Stewart all out there on the floor at the same time. It just seems like a spacing disaster waiting to happen. He's still very raw. We talked about it in summer league. There's going to be a lot of ups and downs, and that's not me saying I don't think that he should have any run. But when you look at this team and the guys who are definitely locks for it, I just have a hard time seeing Ron Holland fitting in right at the beginning of the season. That being said, there's a couple other guys I think are definite candidates. I can see a world where Tim Hardaway Jr. doesn't play all that much. Just looking at the other guards on the roster, it's a really, I wouldn't say stacked guard rotation, but it's certainly a guard rotation with a lot of guys who deserve playing time. And then the last guy I would say, and this is very dependent on really how the big man situation works out. I think Paul Reed is certainly a player that has the possibility of becoming kind of like a break in case of emergency backup center. We'll see what they decide to do with Isaiah Stewart and with Jalen Duren in regards to that rotation. But I think for now, Paul Reed also looks like a guy on the outside looking in.
So a guy that I think is clearly on the outside, and this is even if he makes the roster, is Wendell Moore Jr., who was brought in earlier this offseason in a trade that netted Detroit some second-round draft picks. But he's still on the team as of now, so I thought he was going to be waived shortly after the Pistons acquired him, and then he only played a couple of games in Summer League and didn't look very good. So I don't even know if he'll still be on the team come October, but if he's on the team, I have him out of the rotation. I have Marcus Sasser out of the rotation. I don't think he showed in Summer League that he's ready for a ball handling duty as a backup point guard. As you mentioned, there's a lot of other guards on the roster that are above him on the depth chart when you're talking about off-ball guards. So I just don't see a world where he gets a whole lot of run, at least right away. I don't think Bobby Clintman's in the rotation to start the year. I think he showed some really nice things in Summer League. There's some promise there, but it's going to take some time for him to earn his way into regular rotation minutes. Maybe that's something that happens in the latter half of the season when the Pistons, if the Pistons are out of the playoff hunt. And then after that, I think you can start making cases for anyone else on this roster to get regular minutes. I think there's a case for Paul Reed to get regular minutes. I think there's, a case for Tim Hardaway Jr. and Ron Holland. Here's what I'll say about Ron Holland. I don't know if you take a top 5 pick and not play him at all, especially when you're probably not a playoff team this upcoming season. Like, I get you probably have some better options overall right now, and maybe that's the thing where Holland's just not in the rotation to start the season, but gets into it and gets into a regular rotation spot pretty quickly into the season. It's just hard for me to believe that you invest a top 5 pick in a guy and then don't have plans to get him at least some rotation minutes throughout the year. Looking at someone like Tim Hardaway Jr., I think especially early in the season, he's going to be given that opportunity. JB Bickerstaff definitely gives his vets that opportunity to go out there and earn minutes, kind of lose their spot, if anything. And Tim Hardaway Jr., yes, was out of the rotation here and there with Dallas and was out of the rotation in the playoffs, but that's just a much better team. Like in Detroit, yes, there are some other guys, but they're all pretty much on the same level, especially the guards and wings off the bench. So I think Tim Hardaway Jr. is going to be in there. Malik Beasley's definitely going to be in the rotation. He was, too important of a piece in Milwaukee and has had some really high level seasons. Specifically, I go back to how he played with Utah a few years before that. Like, he's definitely going to be in Detroit's rotation and for all the right reasons. And then all those guys that were, on this team last year that are back, your Simone Fontecchios, your Isaiah Stewarts, your Sar Thompsons, they'll be in the rotation. So the guys that I clearly have out, Wendell Moore Jr., Marcus Sasser, and Bobby Klintman. The guys that I have out in my, my rotation right now, based off what I've written, also include Paul Reed. But I think there's a world where he plays. I certainly think there will be some matchups where he plays. I don't think the Pistons claimed him off waivers and committed $8 million to him just for him to ride the pine every night. So I think there will definitely be some opportunity for him to play.
Yeah, it will be very interesting to see how that rotation shakes out, because there's probably 12 guys you can make a legit argument for that should be in it. I'm thinking Stewart, Fontecchio, Beasley, Tobias Harris, Ron Holland, Cade Cunningham, Marcus Sasser, Asar Thompson, Jalen Duren, Jaden Ivey, Tim Hardaway Jr. There's 12 right there. And I didn't even mention Paul Reed or Bobby Klintman. Like, there's a lot of guys that have a legitimate argument. And I think you're right. I think we're going to see a few different rotations to start the year. I think that there's going to be nights where Ron Holland doesn't play at all. I think there's going to be nights where he plays 10 minutes. And I think that you can probably make that argument for Marcus Sasser as well. There's only I think the absolute locks, the guys who are not falling out of the rotation by any means, are going to be Stewart, Fontecchio, Beasley, Harris, Cade, Asar, Jalen Duren, and Jaden Ivey. So there's 8 right there. So I think that it really gives you 2 more guys out of Paul Reed, Ron Holland, Tim Hardaway Jr., and Marcus Sasser, who are going to get some legitimate playing time on a consistent basis. It's going to be very interesting to see. I mean, I'm glad you said Wendell Moore Jr. I'm going to be honest, I didn't even say him because I kind of thought that was a little obvious. I don't think there's any chance. If Wendell Moore Jr. is in this rotation at any point this season, God help us. God help us all. That's going to be ugly. Yeah, and obviously this is going to be something that's going to change throughout the year as well. Like I said, do I think Ron Holland's going to be getting much playing time to start the year? No. Do I think at the end of the year Ron Holland's going to be seeing some playing time? Yes, I expect significant playing time from Ron Holland there. And that's just going to be the case. Like Bobby Klintman's not going to see a minute on the court to start this year. But after the trade deadline, it's definitely a possibility. Like, in fact, I would probably want to see Bobby Klintman out there because he's a guy whose skill set intrigues me and I think could really do some nice things for the G League team. So, it's going to be very interesting to see how this rotation shakes out. Frankly, I think it's going to be, like one of those things where it's the opposite of last year, where when Monty Williams was making, lineup changes, you're just scratching your head and saying, like, why the hell are we doing this? I think it's going to be kind of the opposite situation where when JB Bickerstaff does make those moves, it's going to be for a purpose that is clear to us. Like, it's going to be a difficult dance as well, because he has to balance development with, seeing what you have out there in terms of some of the younger guys who are a little bit more proven, and then also like putting the right mix of vets on the floor as well. It's going to be very interesting to see that. And something tells me Mike Angelano might have some thoughts on that, but God knows if we'll ever hear him. So yeah, I'm wondering for you, like, do you see that kind of shaking out in that way where there's going to be, do you see it being like a night to night thing, or do you see it more of being like a week to week thing in terms of the rotation kind of switching up? Because I do worry about not giving any of these roster combinations enough time to gel, right? Like, I think we as fans always look at it and say, oh, well, just make this lineup choice and switch this guy out and then do this. But when you hear from NBA players, something that they really respect in a lot of coaches is when they make a decision and stick to it and give that rotation enough time to actually like learn each other and play together and grow as a unit, right?
Well, and the thing with Bickerstaff is it's a new coach. Like, he's going to want to learn this roster. He's going to want to try new lineups. He's going to want to try to figure out what combinations work best, because quite frankly, he has nothing to go off of from last year. There's nothing to look back at and say, hey, this really worked outside of like hey, Cade Cunningham looked good with Simone Fontecchio on the floor because Fontecchio was like the only guy on the team that could shoot a little bit. So it's going to be a process for Bickerstaff to learn this team. And so that's why I think at the beginning of the year, especially, you could see the rotation change on a nightly basis. Like, he may want to try out some different things in game one than he will in game two or game three. That might be matchup dependent. It might be on just the fact that he hasn't seen enough from the roster yet and hasn't gotten enough games to see what he likes yet. So he's going to want to experiment and try different things. And I think that's a good thing because you are a team that won 14 games last year. You have to try any and everything at this point to figure out how to be a better version of the team you were last season. So I'm all for experimenting and trying new things, as long as it obviously doesn't come at like as long as it doesn't hurt those main core guys. I think you're right when you say there's 7-8 guys that are pretty much locks to be in the rotation every night. And so there's probably 2 rotation spots on a nightly basis for 4 guys that probably have at least a case to be a part of the rotation. So that's when matchup dependent things might change. Bickerstaff might try some different things. But as always, and it seems like it's always the case with the Pistons especially, there will be injuries. And guys that were not in the rotation to start the year will find themselves in the rotation at some point in the season. It happens across the NBA. It will certainly happen with the Pistons. So even if someone like Ron Holland isn't in the rotation at the start of the year, I'm sure by a month and a half in, he'll be in it in some way, shape, or form. At some point, the same will be true for someone like Bobby Klintman as well. So give it time. Understand there's going to be some experimenting. There's going to be some trial, and there's certainly going to be some error. But JB Bickerstaff's going to mix some guys around. And as long as he doesn't deploy 5-man bench lineups and Jalen Duren and Paul Reed out there together, like, I think things will be better than they were last season.
The fact that we can even have a discussion like this and that there's multiple guys who are probably not going to be playing much at the beginning of the season who have legitimate arguments to be playing. Look, this is still not a very good team, as we've said many times, but it really does go to show you how much healthier this roster is in terms of its construction, to where when those injuries do inevitably occur, you feel so much safer with the guys who are going to be stepping into that role than you did last year. Like, it's not like, oh, Jalen Duren got hurt. Who's starting? Oh, James Wiseman. Oh, God. It's like, oh, okay, we can throw Paul Reed out there. You just feel so much better about it. Like, Malik Beasley goes down. That sucks. Tim Hardaway Jr. is out there. And now you can slot, Ron Holland into more of a position. Like, it just feels like this year, injuries are not going to kill them in the way that they did last year. Like, there's at least a replacement there that's not Kevin frickin' Knox. You know what I mean? Like, it's just nice to at least have that at your disposal. So it'll be interesting to see how it all shakes out. I think we're both on the same page there. And as we continue to say, there's still a lineup spot open. So this could change even more, like, depending on who they bring in there, because they will have to bring someone in. It could be just kind of a throwaway roster spot, or it could be someone of significance. So that will definitely have an effect on how this roster and how these lineups shake out as well. I'm very interested to see, it's going to be nice if, like, the opening night roster surprise is not like Killian Hayes starting this year. It's something else. Like, it's like, okay, I don't know. Ron Holland's in the opening rotation. It's not like, oh, Killian's playing how many minutes? Jaden Ivey is where? Oh, God, help us all.
No doubt that it feels like the Pistons are in a better spot than we were in last year when we were watching them. But Jasper, as always, a blast to have you with me here on the show. Hopefully we'll have Mike back next week, and all three of us can get together for a good sit down talking about the offseason Pistons. Before everyone goes, make sure to subscribe or follow wherever you're watching or listening to the show from. Leave us a comment, leave us a review, tell us what you think. We always appreciate your support, and it helps us grow tremendously. So please, please, please take that 5, 10, 15 seconds to help us there. Go follow us on all our socials, Palace of Pistons on X, on Instagram, on Facebook, on TikTok. Not super active on TikTok right now, but I'm sure we will get back on there as the season gets a little bit closer. That is going to do it for this week's edition of the Palace of Pistons podcast, brought to you by Believe. Huge thanks to our sponsor, Bet Online, for their continued support of the show. We will see you guys next week for another edition of the Palace of Pistons podcast.